Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a truly fascinating, deeply philosophical text. We're going to impartially unpack Khaled Al-Awami's detailed analysis of the prominent Arab thinker Ali Al-Shurafa, specifically focusing on his bold call to return exclusively to the Quran. Okay, let's just jump right in. What we're actually looking at here is a profound spiritual and civilizational critique. Al-Awami's article explores Al-Shurafa's argument that the original purity of the religious message has basically been clouded over time. Now, our goal here isn't to take a side, but rather to break down exactly what this text is arguing, how it structures its philosophical points, and honestly, why it matters so much in the context of modern theological discussion. So, let's start right at the heart of the conflict with a pretty provocative question. The author essentially asks, is the divine text actually still present in our lives as originally intended, or has it just become this distant relic? This right here sets the entire stage for Al-Shurafa's thesis. The text suggests that the modern world has become totally crowded with human fatwas, historical narratives, and layer upon layer of man-made interpretations. The central tension is whether these human additions have actually pushed humanity away from the original source. It's a really heavy starting point, and it challenges us to think about all those layers of interpretation that just build up over centuries.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 1, the nation's reality in the maze of loss.
The author begins by framing our current human condition as this sheer descent into spiritual darkness. Al-Awami describes humanity as completely lost its spiritual compass, basically just wandering around in a maze of forgetfulness and confusion. It's a completely uncompromising diagnosis of where we are today. On one hand, you have humanity's exhausting reality, which he literally describes as running like wild beasts in the wilderness after a fleeting world. It's an intense visual. On the other hand, you have the exact opposite, what Al-Awami argues the Quran actually offers, which is certainty, mercy, justice, and peace. The text argues that by turning away from the source material, humanity has actively chosen anxiety over profound spiritual grounding. We've essentially traded genuine peace for this temporary, agonizing chase.
To really hammer home the absolute severity of this spiritual abandonment, the text brings in this specific Quranic verse. The author points out that this isn't just some minor academic disagreement. He frames the current era, with all its sectarian disputes, human veneration, and ideological conflict, as a massive civilizational tragedy. By quoting the prophet's own lament about the text being abandoned, Al-Awami elevates the whole argument. It's no longer just a modern critique, right? It's portrayed as the fulfillment of this deep historical sorrow. The abandonment of the text is presented as an open, bleeding wound in the heart of the community.
So, with such a dire diagnosis established, we move right along to Section 2, the call to return to the Quran's spring. This outlines Al-Shurafa's proposed intervention. He views the Quran as the ultimate, uncorrupted constitution for human existence. Think of it as a giant reset button for a society that has lost its way. The article argues that returning to the text isn't just about reading. It's a highly transformative project aimed at fundamentally rescuing humanity from the darkness of fear, ignorance, and division. The ultimate goal? Building a just, merciful, and truly free human being. The source text heavily emphasizes values like security, peace, mercy, and justice, arguing that when the world strays from this foundational text, it loses its very humanity long before it loses anything else. According to the author, sticking closely to this unadulterated guidance is directly tied to individual salvation and escaping misery. He uses this powerful verse as evidence of a literal divine promise. The logic here is super straightforward, but incredibly profound within the context of the article. If humanity is currently suffering and astray, which, as we just established, he believes we are, it is entirely because they have abandoned the guidance. Returning to it, therefore, is the only guaranteed path out of the hardship.
This brings us to a major pivot in the text. Section 3, the prophet's role, delivery without addition.
Here is where the text really challenges the status quo. It directly critiques modern religious structures and the heavy reliance on human additions, historical interpretations, and those secondary texts that have just layered themselves over the original religion over time. The author strictly limits the prophet's mission to just 3 specific things: delivering the message, warning the people, and giving glad tidings. The text argues intensely that the prophet was solely a messenger of God's word, tasked with conveying the revelation, and absolutely not an author of new religious laws or independent fatwas. This is a crucial pillar of Al-Shurafa's philosophy, and it's meant to strip away centuries of human-made doctrines that have been attributed to the prophet.
Using this specific verse as a foundation, the article asserts that the divine message was fully and perfectly completed with the Quran itself, meaning there is no missing piece to the puzzle here. The text argues that the prophet's role was strictly to use this specific, complete book to warn and remind, nothing more, nothing less. It really challenges the viewer to reconsider the necessity of outside texts if the primary text is already deemed perfect and perfectly comprehensive. Then, to firmly cement this critique of human additions, Al-Shurafa points to this incredibly visceral, powerful verse. He argues that the prophet, being the ultimate trustworthy messenger, would literally never dare to attribute unrevealed sayings or laws to God. Therefore, the text concludes, many of the human-made fatwas and secondary sayings that completely dominate modern religious discourse must inherently be invalid. It's a really dramatic, highly charged argument designed to completely dismantle the authority of post-Quranic human scholarship.
Which naturally leads us into Section 4, the true concept of Laylat al-Qadr. Here, we look at how the author rethinks established traditions to perfectly align with this totally Quran-centric philosophy. Traditionally, many view this night merely as a repetitive temporal ritual, just a specific date on the calendar to perform specific acts. But Al-Awami points out that Al-Shurafa beautifully redefines it as the profound, historical descent of divine light that literally changed the course of history. So, the author argues, truly commemorating this night isn't about those repetitive rituals at all. It's about a deep, absolutely sincere return to understanding, contemplating, and actually acting upon the Quran itself. It just brings the focus right back to the text.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Human Liberation and the Open Door of Mercy.
So what does this exclusive return to the text actually look like for you and me on a practical, spiritual level? Well, to build up to this concept of liberation, the article first paints a vivid, terrifying picture of the Day of Judgment. It uses this verse to warn against the ultimate regret. The text creates this deep emotional resonance, describing the profound sorrow of those who just blindly followed human leaders, scholars, or societal norms instead of the divine book itself. It's meant to shake the reader up, acting as this relentless warning bell against making humans your ultimate spiritual compass.
This leads to the ultimate conclusion of the author's argument. This text isn't just a call to read a book. It's a radical call for total human liberation. It advocates for freeing the human mind and soul from the slavery of fear and totally breaking the chains of blind reliance on human scholars or institutional gatekeepers. Instead, the philosophy calls for a direct, completely unmediated relationship between the individual and God. It's a highly empowering, deeply personal view of spirituality, when you really think about it. But to emphasize the absolute beauty and accessibility of this direct relationship, the author highlights this incredibly comforting verse. After all the intense warnings and sharp critiques of modern religious institutions, the text pivots to this vast, welcoming spiritual embrace. It showcases the constantly open door of divine mercy for absolutely anyone who is seeking truth sincerely. It reassures us that God is closer than our own fear, and the path back to this pure source is always, always open.
We're wrapping up this explainer exactly where the author ends his compelling analysis, with that same provocative thought. Is the Quran still present in our lives as God intended, or has it become a distant relic in a world crowded with fatwas and narratives? Al-Awami suggests that the true answer doesn't lie in a textbook or a fatwa, but deep within each individual. It leaves you to reflect on your own spiritual compass and whether it points toward the original source or gets lost in the maze of human additions. Thanks so much for joining me today to break down this truly fascinating perspective.
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.